You've heard it said that storytelling is everything. But what if everything is storytelling? What if every action we take, every word we speak, every thought we think is a story? If so, then we all need to be better storytellers, because the story we tell will determine the impact we make in our lives, in our work, and in our dreams. I'm Jonathan Jordan, your storytelling coach, and this is Everything is Storytelling, a podcast for people obsessed with story.
What do you do when you don't have firsthand experience with a problem? Or even if you do, how can you provide external proof of the idea you're sharing with your audience? Today, we're continuing this series on the 5 story types. In previous episodes, I discussed personal anecdotes and problem solution stories. But today, we're getting into story type number 3, case studies. And this one is one of my favorites because it allows you to borrow someone else's story and make it part of your own. If you missed the first couple of story types, don't worry. You can always go back into the feed and re-listen to those episodes later on. But we covered personal anecdotes and problem solution stories. Now, today we're talking about case studies. And here's the deal. Technically, both personal anecdotes and problem solution stories can also be seen as case studies. The difference, however, is that personal anecdotes and problem solution stories, they really focus solely on the first-hand experience that you are sharing as a story. And there's a problem that you're going to run into with first-hand accounts. Sometimes you're going to get some really annoying objections. Things like, sure, but how do you know this is going to work for anyone else besides you? Or where's the proof that this actually works? Or how do I know that this is going to work in my industry or in my business? Now, all of these objections, they might be a little annoying, but they are completely legitimate and they are worth answering, okay? So in one of my favorite business books, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, he uses a ton of case studies. In fact, he starts off the entire book using the Vietnam War as a case study to actually talk about his main thesis, which is the fact that businesses should be run as infinite games, not as finite games. And here's what I love about him using the Vietnam War as a case study is that he was not directly involved in the war in any way. He was a toddler at the time that the war ended. So it's not like he fought as a soldier in it or like he was part of any kind of military strategy conversations. Okay. So the Vietnam War is not a first-hand experience story that he is sharing. So it's not an anecdote and it's not exactly a problem solution story, but it serves as a really powerful case study. And what I love so much about case studies is they allow you to bolster your claim and your idea by using some other context to show how your idea plays out. Okay, so to dig into this a little bit more, there's really 2 main types of case studies that you need to think about. Okay. The first is extended case studies, and then the second is examples. So let's talk about extended first. Extended case studies are full-fledged stories that take up more space on the page if you're thinking about this in terms of a book, okay? They're often going to require some supporting research. They are the type of stories that you're going to need to contextualize for people because maybe not everyone knows the story. In fact, in The Infinite Game, another one of my favorite case studies that Sinek uses is talking about George Eastman. Who's George Eastman? He's the founder of Kodak. And so he uses the story of Kodak as this case study, again, to prove his main point of the book. I don't want to spoil too much. Go read the book. It's great. But it's one of those things where it proves that an extended case study, you are going to have to unpack it more more carefully for your audience because you're explaining more and you're painting a picture for them of how your idea plays out. Okay. So one of my book coaching clients actually used full-fledged case studies pretty much throughout the entirety of his book. And for the most part, they were problem solution stories. So he was sharing a lot of firsthand experience on different problems that they encountered and then how they solved those problems. And then really use those to frame a series of questions for the reader on how they could then apply his strategies to solve their own problems. It was great. Really fun project to work on. But then we got to the conclusion of his book, and suddenly the well had just run dry on ideas. He didn't know what story he wanted to use here at this pivotal moment of his book where he really needed to land the plane. So after our call, I went back through my notes. I started brainstorming some ideas of what would make a good story for this conclusion of his book. And at first I was thinking maybe there's a story he shared with me along the way that could work and we haven't used it elsewhere in the book. But then I landed on the perfect case study that we could use. The story of the English Navy defeating the Spanish Armada. This author was already a lover of history, and he had actually devoted an entire chapter to historical concepts. So this story actually, it didn't only fit the message of his book, it was consistent with his voice and his personality. So we ended up using the story of the Spanish Armada's defeat by the English as a case study to tee up his call to action, and the details of the battle we were able to actually mold into creative callbacks for different lessons that had been sprinkled throughout the book. But as an extended case study, it ended up taking, I think, at least the entire first page of the conclusion. So it was a little bit longer. Now, let's contrast that to the second type of case study, which are examples. Examples are one-offs. They usually don't take up more space than a paragraph. They're super relatable. They're down to earth. They're universal. You don't need to do a whole lot of research and citations for them, okay? You're not going to have to convince anyone of the fact that you are sharing because they are examples. So they might sound something like this. For example, walking your dog without taking along a poop bag shows a fundamental lack of foresight. Or hanging out with toxic friends is like guzzling a gallon of milk when you know you're lactose intolerant. The only person you're hurting is yourself. So we use examples all of the time. They're super powerful because you make your point really quickly and you do it in a way that's so relatable that you're actually building rapport with your audience at the same time. So nothing against personal anecdotes, nothing against problem solution stories, nothing against firsthand accounts in general. I'm a big fan of all of those, obviously. But when you're writing a nonfiction book, or you're working on a keynote address, I will say that if you use too many firsthand accounts, not only are you going to run into those objections that I mentioned earlier, but you're also going to run the risk of sounding a bit like a narcissist because you're only sharing stories about yourself. Case studies are an incredible way that you can add some variety into your storytelling, mix it up a little bit, and shine the spotlight on another situation, maybe another leader that you admire, or or using an example of what not to do, right? So those are just some of the wonderful things you can do with case studies that you can't always do with the other story types we've covered so far. And you do want to mix it up as well, because I like to think of it this way. If you only use full-fledged case studies, so those longer ones, it's kind of like dropping a side of beef in front of your dinner guest and nothing else. Like, it might smell really great and it might be prepared perfectly, but it might just be too overwhelming. Okay. If you only offer up examples for your audience, then it's the equivalent of just giving them a bowl of jelly beans. Again, at first it kind of feels, sweet and, oh, this is tasty. But after a while, it kind of starts to make you feel a little bit sick. So you really need a balanced diet in your storytelling. So you need to be able to use both extended case studies and examples effectively. So next steps for you are to pull out a piece of paper or your phone, whatever it is that you like to document ideas on, and you need to start thinking about some of those case studies and examples that you use on a regular basis. You probably don't even realize you're using them, but they are already out there. You just need to start documenting them and then weaving them into your content, whether that's a social media post or a book, whatever it is you happen to be working on right now. Okay. And if this has sparked your imagination and you want to learn a bit more about how to use case studies and what that looks like, then you can go grab a copy of Start with Story, my book. It's on Amazon, or you can get it at bookshop.org as well, so that you can help out a local bookshop that you love. Really cool website. I encourage everyone to go check out bookshop.org. But go grab that, read the book, and if this was helpful to you at all, then would you take, 1 minute before you close out of your podcast app and leave a 5-star review and say what you enjoy about the show? It'll help other people find the show and help us spread the storytelling movement to more people. But in the meantime, keep working on those stories, find all those case studies, write down those examples, and remember that we can change the world one story at a time.